On today's Locked On Giants podcast, the New York Giants begin OTAs a week from today. So we're looking at the position groups to determine if they're on the right track. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Hope you are having a great day, and thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's episode, the Giants start OTAs a week from today. So it'll be the first Tuesday after Memorial Day. The first media access will be on Wednesday, but ahead of the OTAs, what I thought we'd do on today's show is just go through each position group, determine if it's better or worse or the same as it was last year, and just kind of also look at, what to watch in each position group, whether it be a position battle, whether it be a particular player, or so forth and so on. So that's going to be what we're going to do on today's program. Again, welcome on into everybody. All right, let's jump right in. We're going to start on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, we will start with quarterback. And is the position group better or worse or the same as last year? Folks, I think it's better. Now, I know there are some people who say, well, Russell Wilson, he's not the quarterback he used to be. Jameis Winston is a turnover waiting to happen. Jackson Dart's a rookie. Tommy DeVito may not even be on this roster. Anyway, this is a better group. This is a little bit more experienced group with Winston and Wilson. That's what the Giants were looking for, was to add more experience, just so these guys can go in and win a few more games that, they weren't able to quite get last year. And the belief by Joe Shea and head coach Brian Daboll and the rest of the organization was pretty much that the quarterback play really held the offense back. And you can kind of see that if you look at, how the offense has been constructed this offseason. They really put most of their resources towards the defensive side of the ball, which we'll get to a little later on in the program. But quarterback play was a high priority as far as upgrading. Now, as far as what to watch in any position battles, obviously all eyes are going to be on Jackson Dart. We will probably see a lot of him in the OTAs. We'll probably see a lot of him in training camp and in the preseason. And, what milestones are we going to be looking for from him? Well, how quickly is he absorbing the playbook? How, calm is he under pressure? How does he respond? What is he making the right decisions? Is his accuracy there? These are all things we're going to be looking for from Jackson Dart. I do believe we'll see a lot of Dart in the preseason. I'd be kind of surprised if we don't. I'd like to think also that we will see some of a little bit more of Russell Wilson, because look, a problem that this team has had in the past is they come out of the gate slow, particularly on offense. And that's, I attribute to the fact that the Giants just don't spend enough time, in my opinion, giving the starters work in the preseason games, the pace of which you cannot simulate in practices. So I'd like to hope that they're going to change that, moving forward. The other thing to watch, obviously, and this is going to be like a secondary story, but Tommy DeVito versus the league. All right. I think, if everything stays the same, I don't see Tommy DeVito making this team. I don't think Tommy DeVito even lands on the practice squad. I suspect if he is cut by the Giants, which, again, if Wilson and Winston and Dart are healthy, I don't see them carrying 4 quarterbacks. I don't think DeVito makes it to the practice squad. I could see, like I said, on yesterday's program, I could see maybe the Saints kicking the tires on him if he is cut. So, if for no other reason, because DeVito has some experience and, it's a little bit better than the situation the Saints have right now. But quarterback overall, better, slightly better. There's still development to be done, obviously, with Dart, but I think this position group is headed in the right direction. All right, running back. I think running back is better. The addition of Cam Skattebo gives the Giants a potential future of a thunder and lightning with Tyrone Tracy, Skattebo. I think that's going to be a good combination. Now, as I've also said, I don't know that Skattebo is going to come out of the gate in week 1 and be RB2. I suspect he will be RB3 at that point, maybe do some third down, work assuming that he shows he could pass pro. But I do think for the time being, Devin Singletary will still have a role in this team. I know, again, there's been a lot of, articles and speculation that Devin Singletary is going to be cut. I don't think that's going to happen as of today. Now, obviously, that's subject to change. Let's see how we get through training camp, how Skattebo looks, if he can pass pro, which is the key to him getting on the field. But I think the Giants running back group as a whole, better. I think the position battles we have to keep an eye on for this particular group. Eric Gray versus Dante Miller. I do think the Giants will keep 4 running backs. So you figure Tracy, Skattebo, and Singletary are going to be the 3. And then one of Gray and Miller will probably be the 4th one, I would think. I have a feeling, Gray was a draft pick. Miller, an undrafted free agent. I think, I could be wrong here, but, I think Miller might be the odd man out. And I know people are like, why? He's, turbo Miller, fast and everything like that. Again, it's going to come down to pass pro. And not that Gray is the best at pass pro, but, I think he can contribute on special teams, as can Miller, mind you. But I think maybe Gray will, right now, if I had to take a guess, I think maybe Gray will edge Miller out if they decide to roll with 4 running backs. And it's possible that whoever they decide to roll with ends up on the practice squad. I wouldn't rule that out either. So, that's certainly a possibility to keep an eye on. All right, tight end. I think that group is kind of the same, even though they drafted Thomas Fidone in the 7th round. Basically, Theo Johnson's going to be TE1. You could say probably that Daniel Bellinger is penciled in at TE2. You've got Chris Manhertz, who's the blocker. Fidone, I think, is going to, in the future, he's going to be the blocker. He's going to take on that Manhertz role, but he's got to get a little bit more bulk to him. To that point, I think the position battle to keep an eye on it at tight end is going to be Fidone versus Greg Dulcich. The Giants kept Dulcich around after adding him late last year. So Fidone, I think, could maybe land up on the practice squad. But, the question is are the Giants going to want to keep 4 tight ends? I don't think they will on the 53-man roster, but I could easily see one of them, if they keep 3 on the roster, 1 goes to the practice squad. So that's what I think might be happening there. All right, wide receiver, the group is the same. I mean, even though the Giants added a bunch of receivers, your top 3 are still the same. Neighbors, Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson. So, it's just a matter of how they sort out wide receiver 4, 5, and 6. Who's going to fill those spots? To that end, the position battle to watch is going to be Jalen Hyatt versus whoever they might bring in. If they bring in Gabe Davis, I suspect Gabe Davis is going to leapfrog over Jalen Hyatt. And Jalen Hyatt, one of the things with him, he obviously needs to run a little bit better, his routes a little bit better. If he wants to get out there, he needs to be where he needs to be when the quarterback releases the ball. I think that was part of the problem last year. But the receiver group, as far as the top guys are concerned, it's pretty much the same unit. So, if they add Gabe Davis, if Davis is healthy, then I think you can say maybe that makes the group a little bit better. But right now, it's status quo for that group. All right, coming up next, we've got more position groups. We're going to take a look at the trenches. That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't miss moments. Whether it's a game winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time than now to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip off and live. Are you feeling good about the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals? I know I am. So why not explore the different categories where you can win big, such as player props, performance trends, same game parlays? Just think your first $5 winning bet can yield you $200 in bonus bets to add to the excitement. So if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to fanduel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, again, you will get $200 in bonus bets to use however you please. So go on, make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Coming up tomorrow, I'm going to have Solomon Wilcox. He's going to be on the program. We're going to talk Giants. Solomon's been on the program before. Always a good guest, always full of a lot of, great information. So he's going to be on the show. And then, of course, we're going to continue to roll through the rest of the week with different topics here on the Locked On Giants podcast as we get you ready for next week's start of OTAs. And speaking of OTAs, we're running down the different position groups on the Giants ahead of OTAs, taking a look at if the units are better or worse, given all that the TLC that General Manager Joe Shane put towards each position group to improve a roster that last year kind of underperformed. And we're also taking a look at position battles to watch or players to watch. So now let's turn it to the trenches, which is a very, very important area and one that, gosh, they better be better at, given how they were pushed around on both sides of the ball last year. All right, so we will start with the offensive line. Now I'm going to loop every position kind of in together, and then I'll just break it down for you. But as on the whole, I think the offensive line is a little bit better. Now the starting five, for what it's worth, they're kind of running it back as of right now with the same guys that they had last year. So from left to right, Andrew Thomas at left tackle, John Runyon Jr. at left guard, John Michael Schmitz at center, Greg Van Roten at right guard, Jermaine Illuminor at right tackle. That unit last year wasn't that bad. The big problem with the offensive line last year was the depth behind those guys. I've been screaming about how they don't really have any quality young guys that they can develop and get those guys ready so that if there is an injury or you have to shuffle the line around, you have somebody you can plug in and not have to worry about. So the reason why I say the line's a little bit better, they brought in guys who can play tackle if something happens to Andrew Thomas again. Andrew Thomas has had injury issues the last couple of years. If something happens to Jermaine Illuminor at tackle. All right. Now the interior depth, they have Marcus Bowe, one of their draft picks. Even though he's going to be working mostly at tackle, he can play inside at guard. So that's a little bit better. And then obviously, there's going to be competition for some of the other guys. You've got Austin Schlottman. You've got Evan Neal, who's going to make try to make the conversion to guard. You've got Joshua Zudu, who's entering the final year of his contract. Where's he going to be? Is he going to be able to stick it out? I mean, so there are options available along the interior, and that's probably where the biggest question mark lies, as far as I think the offensive line is concerned. So that being said, I think the position battle you want to keep an eye on is probably going to be Evan Neal versus Marcus Bowe. All right. Now, again, I think Evan Neal's days as playing tackle for the Giants are over. They're going to look to get him up to speed at guard. I don't know if necessarily there's going to be a starting position for him. I think they would like to have that happen. Greg Van Roten, they brought back. He was pretty steady. And he's a guy that, oh, by the way, you can play at center if you need him to. But I think, if they could, they'd maybe like to upgrade Van Roten, maybe have Van Roten as more of a backup or a depth piece as opposed to a starter. So that's a position battle I think we probably want to keep an eye on. And then, it's going to come down to another position battle that's really not going to take center stage, but I think is important. Which of Stone Forsythe and James Hudson III is going to end up being the swing tackle? Or is that going to be Marcus Bowe? I don't know. But I don't think they keep all three of those guys on the roster. So I'm going to be curious to see how that shakes out as well. All right, defensive line, definitely better. Giants got better depth. They added some veteran guys. They added, obviously, Darius Alexander, who's the future, next to Dexter Lawrence. He's a guy who I think if Dexter Lawrence has to come off the field, once Darius Alexander gets up to speed, I don't think there'll be a drop-off if Dexter Lawrence leaves the field, because Darius Alexander can step in for a play or two if he needs to, should Dexter Lawrence need a blow. So that being said, just there's more depth, veteran depth, young depth. It's a little deeper group than it was last year. All right. And, if you're looking at a roster battle to keep an eye on, an early one, you look at the incumbent starter next to Dexter Lawrence, which was Rakeem Nunez-Roches versus Darius Alexander. And Alexander should probably win this battle, I would think, barring injury. I just, no disrespect to Nacho. He's a great guy, but I'm kind of surprised he's still on the team. I guess they're doing that because they want to have competition and it's depth and it's no sweat off their nose. But given the cap hit that he carries, to me, it just makes sense to, go younger. And you've got these other guys on your roster that, that are cheaper, that can give you the veteran depth as well. But that's probably the battle I would keep an eye on if regarding the defensive line. All right. One more position before we take our next break, and let's look at inside linebacker. That group's really the same. Giants didn't do a whole lot in terms of adding new faces to that group. The incumbent starters, Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden entering the final year of his contract. Darius Mawaso's coming back in year 2. They kept Deontay Johnson, brought him back. He was very promising looking last year. And they also brought back Ty Summers, who's more of a special teams guy. And then, they have a couple of other guys who are probably more special teams, but pretty much the same for inside linebacker. And I think, if you're looking at a position battle, it could come down to Johnson versus Mawaso versus Summers. I don't know that the Giants are going to keep all three of those guys. They added Chris Board to the to special teams. He's a core special teamer. So I could see Chris Board maybe, having a roster spot. He was a very good special teamer. Is he going to push out, for example, Ty Summers, who wasn't too bad at special teams last year? I don't know. But, basically the depth, the bottom of that depth chart at linebacker, inside linebacker, it's going to depend on how they perform on special teams. That's what's going to be the deciding factor. So that's going to be, I think, an under the radar type of battle to keep an eye on this summer. All right, coming up next, we'll cover up the last of the positions. We've got outside linebacker, safety, cornerback, and we'll just touch briefly on specialists because I have some thoughts there as well. So don't go anywhere. We'll have that for you right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And again, tomorrow, Solomon Wilcox, who's a former NFL player. He's also a broadcaster for Sirius XM, NFL radio, and other media outlets. He's going to be my guest. We're going to talk Giants football. We're going to get his insight into some of the things that are going on in the land of the Giants. But for now, we're going through the Giants position groups. We're looking at if they are better or worse, given the work that Joe Schoen did in the offseason. And we're kind of setting the stage for the start of OTAs. And I want to just add real quick, jobs are not going to be won or lost during OTAs because it's padless practices. There's no contact. So I get that. But, we can kind of get an early feel for how the battles are shaping up. And that's really what I'm trying to do here with today's program is kind of, are they better, worse, and where's the battles to watch? And, who are some of the players to keep an eye on who maybe, they really need to have a strong summer to bring it home. So let's now move to outside linebackers. All right. Definitely better. All right. The addition of Abdul Carter to a unit that includes Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, I think Chauncey Golston, he's more defensive lineman, but I'm curious to see if he does any standing up. This is a better group. And I've said for the longest time that, you want to have at least 3 deep with your pass rushers. And now you can say that the Giants have it. So definitely, I think that is a better unit. And, there's not going to be really a position battle here to watch. I know some people are like, well, is Abdul Carter going to battle Kayvon Thibodeau for the starting job? I don't know that that's something I would say is something to watch. I think what is there to watch is how is Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, going to get all 3 of those guys on the field at once? All right, especially for obvious passing downs. Is he going to create his own NASCAR package? Is he going to do a 4 aces type of package? How is he going to get all those guys on the field at one time? So that to me is really the interesting storyline for that particular position group is how that pass rush, that improved pass rush is going to be built. And particularly, how are they going to deploy Carter? Are they going to have him move to inside linebacker? Are they going to have him rush? Is he going to stay home? Is he going to drop into coverage? What exactly are they going to do with him on specific passing downs? So something to keep an eye on, especially as we get into training camp and we start charting, okay, here's what they did on 3rd and long, here's what they did on 3rd and short, and so on and so forth. All right, next position group, safety. I think you could say that the safety position group is a little bit better, right? We know that they lost Jason Pinnock, but they brought in Javon Holland. I think that's a little bit of an upgrade. There's still some depth issues here, and I think, a guy to keep an eye on is Dane Belton. Dane Belton is entering the final year of his rookie deal. Kind of hope that he would be a starter at this point, but he hasn't really been able to do that. Part of the reason has been due to injuries, I think. But, Dane Belton, I'm curious to see how they use him. There's some other guys that they have at safety. Are any of those guys going to step up and really, seize the bull by the horns? I mean, I don't know. To me, the safety position, even though it's better, I think, it's still a smidge thin as of right now. But as we get to see these guys, maybe things change. Maybe the position group doesn't look as thin as it does. So something definitely to keep an eye on there. All right, cornerback. I think this group is the same. Even with the addition of Paulson and Debo, I think this group is the same. And the reason why I'm saying that, the depth at outside corner, okay, you've got Cordell Flott, who was projected to be a starter last year, couldn't hold on to it. And then, is Deontay Banks going to finally get back on track after kind of a rocky year last year? So to me, cornerback, specifically outside cornerback, I still have question marks about that. I feel a little bit better about the slot cornerback position. I think, Drew Phillips coming in year 2. And Drew Phillips, by the way, I don't know if you guys caught it, but over on New York Giants on SI, I happened to do a quick story. Drew Phillips had LASIK surgery to improve his eyesight, which I found, interesting. So I wrote a little blurb about that over on New York Giants on SI. But Drew Phillips, solid slot option. And I'm just wondering, the thing to watch there is, are the Giants going to leave him exclusively in the slot? I know in the past they tried to do a committee approach, but I suspect they did the committee approach because they didn't really have a solid option there. Now they do. But are they going to leave Phillips exclusively in the slot, or are they going to play him a little bit outside, which they did a little bit of last year, but his role was primarily the slot. So that's going to be something I'm curious about. And then the undrafted free agent, there's one undrafted free agent I'm really curious to see more of, and that's O'Donnell Fortune. who, based on what I've read now, I've been trying to get hold of more of his film to take a look at, but, you know, a lot of favorable stuff has been written about O'Donnell Fortune. I don't know if he's going to necessarily make the 53, but certainly as a developmental candidate, if he has a strong summer, sure, on the practice squad, why not? So still remains to be seen. I want to see how they do, in person, watching the OTAs, which again, jobs aren't going to be won or lost, but you can kind of get a feel for how a guy is kind of, is he comfortable? Is he a playmaker? Is he passive or all that stuff? All right. And then last but not least, I'm going to talk real quick about the specialists. Now, Casey Kreider at long snapper, he's set. Jamie Gillen at punter, he's set. Graham Gano at kicker, I think is set. But as I said yesterday, Gano has had injury issues the last couple of years, which is a concern, because look, the more your kicking leg gets injured, are you ever going to be the same strength-wise? So that to me would be a concern. If Gano can make those long-distance field goals like he used to, Mr. Automatic, the kickoffs, can he do a little bit better job on the kickoffs? And yes, I know last year they had the dynamic kickoff, and I'm sure some of those shorter kickoffs were a result of what the coaches called. But, I just always felt even before that Gano's kickoff strength started to dip a little bit. So I want to see how he does. Now, they have Jude McIntyre they're bringing into camp as of right now. Do I think he's going to challenge Gano? I don't know that I would say that. I think if anything else, McIntyre's probably going to take some of the load off of Gano. So that's what I think is going to happen. But I just want to kind of see how that plays out because that's so important. We've seen what happens when the Giants don't have a reliable kicker or a healthy kicker, as the case were. So yeah, that's something to keep an eye on. Gano, he's got, I think, the third or fourth highest salary cap hit amongst kickers this coming year. And I just think the Giants need a little bit more from him. They didn't do anything with him or, adjust his salary or anything like that. But let's see how that plays out. Is he going to rebound? Is he going to stay healthy? Is he going to have a little bit better year overall when he gets on the field? So that's something certainly to keep an eye on. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Again, tomorrow we're going to have Solomon Wilcox on. He's going to talk Giant football with us. And we'll continue to have coverage of your New York Giants. We're still 5 days a week here on the Locked On Giants podcast for at least another month or so before we go into our summer schedule. Hope you will be with us, not only tomorrow, but for the rest of those shows. So thanks so much for spending part of your day with us. And don't forget to check out Locked On NFL Scouting as your next listen. Plenty of great stuff there covering the entire league. So if you're into the entire league, check out that program. Check out all our Locked On programs. We've got Locked On Knicks, hot stuff there, obviously with the playoffs, as well as our college programs, our MLB programs, our hockey programs, and so forth. All right, Giant fans, I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great night.